Welcome to my top 10 Thieves list. I base my list on everything from gameplay to personality and story, so since not only gameplay, this list is more my favorite Thieves and not the very best ones. Surprisingly, Thief classes are some of my favorites in Fire Emblem, and many of the characters here are some of my most liked characters in their games. Therefore, this has been a really difficult list to make. Something that is also noteworthy with this list is that it's my first list with Fate's characters in it. I now played the game enough to actually include characters from it. This list was originally going to be a top 5, but thanks to Fates it has evolved to a top 10. To make things clear, the classes that will be included in this list are Thieves, Ninja, Outlaws and their promotions. However, Bone Knights is not included here, even though it's a promotion for Outlaws. Bone Knights were covered in my Bow Units video, so if you're interested in Bone Knights you can check that video out. Another exception is the puppeteer Yukimura from Fire Emblem Fates. He does not have the ninja class but the apothecary class as his base, so he won't be included here either. Before we start, I'll just mention some honorable mentions. These are thieves that I've used actively in Fire Emblem games, but they didn't quite make it onto my list. So from Thracia 776 we have Riffis, from Binding Blade, Shad, Blazing Swords Jafar, Sacred Stones Colm, Radiant Dawn's Soth, and last from Awakening and Fates we have Anna. Lastly, there are spoilers in this video, especially if you haven't played Fire Emblem Fates yet, so keep that in mind before you start watching. With all of that out of the way, let's begin! Starting this list with Sacred Stone's Renak. He joins as a rogue and he isn't too great in combat. Colm will most definitely be better if he's trained by the time Renak joins, which is rather late in the game. Renak didn't take the 10th spot with his combat abilities though, he's here because I like his personality and story. Before he joins you can see Renak either traveling with La Rochelle and Dosla or hiding from them several times in the game. It's his interactions with these two, La Rochelle in particular, that makes me like him a lot. Renak is the son of a wealthy merchant from Corsino. Due to his background he has a strong appreciation for money. He's greedy and somewhat moody, which is a bad fit for his two companions La Rochelle and Dosla, whom both are very enthusiastic and righteous. This all makes for some pretty hilarious interactions between the three. I got a few laughs out of Renak's misery. His conversations with La Rochelle are some of my favorites from Sacred Stones. The only use you'll have for him in the game is that he arrives as a rogue, a class that can open chests without lockpicks. I always hated how you needed lockpicks for thieves in the GBA games, so Renak never having to use any has always been a plus. He's pretty worthless when it comes to fighting though, so Colm's the superior choice when it comes to a thief in the game. Renak's personality is still enough for me to have him on my list over Colm though, so the 10th place went to him. On the 9th place is Patty from Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. Unlike Dew from the first generation of the game, Patty can actually turn out reliable and she proves to be much more useful. Depending on which father she has, she can range from decent to pretty good. She's a strong and kind girl. She and her brother Faval were separated from their mother when they were young children, which led to the both of them growing up in an orphanage. Both Patty and her brother are very protective of their orphanage, and they do their best to provide for the kids there. Patty's story has a happy ending, as she and Faval are reunited with their mother in the end, one of the few survivors of the first generation. While definitely not the strongest unit in battle, Patty proves to be useful in many different ways. As early as her recruitment, she contributes a lot to your army by handing over the Balmung to Shannon. With that sword, he'll become one of your best units in the game. Being a thief, she can steal money from enemies and later give that money to someone who needs it, like your holy weapon users. She's not as worthless as Dew is, so Patty can actually do this effectively. I also always have Lex as her father, so my Patty is really strong and has good defense, and she arrives with a Paragon skill, so training her has never been difficult for me. So, the first character from Fire Emblem Fates to ever rank on one of my lists is the Kunoichi Kagero. She's one of Ryoma's extremely loyal retainers, and she's recruited in Birthright and Revelation after she's rescued from the Mokushuji ninja by your army. Kagero is a very serious and calm person. She's loyal and dedicated to her liege, putting his safety and needs before her own. This leads to Kagero not having much time for anything else, but she does have a few hobbies, with drawing being her biggest interest. Even though she's very calm and serious, Kagero is still friendly and she does have a few friends in the army. Out of the 3 ninja you'll get in the first generation of Fates, Kagero is the strongest one. She's pretty much the definition of a glass cannon, as she's very frail but she gives a lot of damage. The ninja class was something I loved in Fates, and I ended up using all of them, barring characters from the second generation, since I didn't use them at all. Since Kagero arrives last of the ninja in all routes, I found the least use for her. She has still always turned out great for me, just not quite as good as the other 2. That's why Kagero has scored rather low on this list. The competition from not only the other games, but her own game too, was just too great. On 7th place is Matthew from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Matthew is a spy from Austria that first joins you in Lynn's story for a few chapters, and then rejoins you in either Eliwood or Hector's story permanently. He's an optimistic and nice guy. He's usually friendly, but he can be a bit sarcastic, and he always speaks his mind. The exception to his friendly nature would be his conversations with Jafar. In their support, he even tries to kill Jafar due to Jafar being the one who murdered Layla, a fellow spy and Matthew's love interest. Like most thieves, and especially the ones from the GBA era, Matthew is rather weak. He'll usually have big strength problems, and he's quite frail as well. He still manages to hold his own though, as his high speed and luck gives him a high avoid. There are still definitely better options for dodge tanks in the game, and Matthew's biggest use is that he can steal items and open chests. Something else that affects him in a negative way is that he promotes really late in the game, so if you want to use an assassin, Jafar is the better option. But since thieves are one of my favorite classes, I always end up using Matthew a lot anyway, because he joins much earlier than the other thieves and I have always liked his personality. So to me, Matthew is my most liked thief in Blazing Sword. This is where my list goes from characters I like to characters I love. I really wanted to have Julian, the first thief in the entire series, higher on my list, but there were just too many characters fighting for the top 5. With Julian being from the earliest games, he got the short end of the stick. I still love him though, he's one of my favorite characters from Marth games. Despite having a shady background, Julian is a great person that decides to seek redemption and to live an honest life after he meets his great love Lena. He used to belong to the gang of thieves and bandits called the Soothsayers, but when Marth's army approaches them, Julian sees his chance and betrays them to escape with Lena, whom they kept captive. After the war, Lena and Julian open an orphanage where they care for orphans together. While he's useful for you in the first game, he will be crucial for you in the second game he appears in if you want to rescue the 4 maidens in the final chapter. He's the only one who can break Lena out of her brainwashing, so to rescue her you will need Julian in the final chapter. In the end, they marry each other and live happily at their orphanage. In Marth's games, thieves couldn't promote, which makes them lose a few levels compared to other units, putting them at a disadvantage. This has never proved to be a problem for Julian when I've played his games though. Julian usually becomes better than the Swordmaster in a bar for me, being a stronger but slightly slower version of him. The only negative is that it's more difficult to train Julian, but once he gets there, he will be awesome for you and you won't regret using him. Now for one of my favorite characters in Fire Emblem Fates. I really did love how useful the ninja class was in Fates with all their debuffs and poison strike, so like I mentioned earlier, I ended up using all 3 of them. Saizo's probably the best one of them in Birthright, the version used them in most. Saizo is Ryoma's other retainer and he might be even more dedicated and loyal than Kagero is, whom I covered earlier on the list. He's a serious person but also very cold and temperamental as opposed to his calm and friendly twin brother. He's a very brash person and won't hesitate to blow himself up to take his enemies down with him. Being extremely cautious, he appears a bit rude and unfriendly to people. But deep down he's a real softie and he cares a lot about people. If found out on this though, he becomes very embarrassed and will quickly make excuses. Compared to Kagero and Kase, Saizo is the middle ground between the two. That doesn't stop him from shining in some areas though. Saizo's got great skill and will therefore activate skills and critical hits more than the others. He also has better defense than the other 2 and better magic, making him a good candidate for the Flame Shuriken if you aren't using Felicia. I found the Barb Shuriken to work wonders with Saizo, since his great skill made him activate criticals like a monster. Saizo easily became one of my best units while playing Birthright, and he was one of the characters I loved the most personality-wise as well, so he was guaranteed a high spot here. Moving on to the most mysterious one of them all, Volk appears in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but he plays a much more important role in the former. As the only assassin you'll get in the Thieves games and by far the coolest one of the Thieves, Volk has always been my choice for a knife user in both games. Volk is a famous and very mysterious assassin known as the Fireman in the world of Thieves. Years before the story starts in Path of Radiance, Ike's father Greel hired Volk as a safety if Greel was ever to go berserk again, something that speaks a lot for how skilled Volk really is. It was also to tell Ike of the dangers of Laron's medallion if Greel would die before he could do it himself. It's after Greel's death that Volk joined your army in the disguise of a common thief. It will take until chapter 19 in Path of Radiance for Volk to reveal everything he knows, and finally to promote to an assassin. In Radiant Dawn, Volk arrives very late. He's one of the last units you'll get, so you will most likely already have many trained units and therefore not much use of Volk. Especially since you're forced to use the inferior Soph, who will fill up a spot as a knife user. I often use Volk anyway and give him Soph's blessed weapon too, meaning my Volk has two great weapons in the end. The biggest negative in gameplay for Volk is that he can only use knives. This isn't too much of a problem in Radiant Dawn where knives have been buffed. In Path of Radiance, however, the game you'll mostly use him in, knives were terrible. Volk is still very much worth using as he is way superior to Soph, who is unable to promote in Path of Radiance. He'll be like a weaker swordmaster, but with the chance of insta-killing enemies with his lethality skill. In Radiant Dawn, he's much better, even though he arrives very late. He now arrives with great stats and good growth. He also arrives with lethality and a 25 plus crit skill, the highest crit bonus in the game. If you put a gamble skill on Volk, he will become the best unit at landing critical hits in game. So in Radiant Dawn, Volk is amazing and I always enjoy using him there, even though he arrives late. To me, Volk will always be the most badass thief in the series and the most mysterious one too. On the third place we find one of my favorite units from Fire Emblem Fates. I did not expect to love Niles as much as I do now when I first started playing Conquest, but he was so incredibly useful in several different aspects that he became one of my absolute favorite units. This guy can do anything. There are few units I found as useful in a Fire Emblem game as how useful Niles was. Niles was abandoned by both of his parents when he was a child. He joined a gang of thieves that became his family. But when they failed to rob the Norian Palace, his friends abandoned him. Niles was spared by Prince Leo and became his retainer, swearing loyalty to the man who saved him. He's a very cold and sadistic person that takes pleasure in other people's misery. He enjoys seeing other people suffer, especially those who have it easy in life. This all comes from some sort of jealousy, as Niles had to grow up in a very miserable and poor way, while those who had it good did nothing to help. While it's rude and unpleasant to many, he does however act very differently with the people he treasures, as seen in how he acts around his potential children. He doesn't want them to become like him or to follow his footsteps, so he's very protective of them. While I like Niles' story and personality, it's in gameplay where I truly love him. This guy is great at pretty much anything, barring tanking physical attacks, as his defense is pretty terrible. His great speed will pretty much guarantee him to double most units. His amazing resistance will make mages look like a joke. His decent magic and strength makes him good with both magical and physical based weapons. Niles with a shining bow is pretty broken. It makes him able to kill the tanky enemies as well. He can also heal decently and he has more movement than other foot based units. He's also the only unit who can capture enemies in Conquest. So yeah, in Conquest, Niles will be one of your most useful units. He's great in Revelation too, however he arrives way too late and too low level for you to even consider using him. Especially when you already have Takumi. I love Niles so much in Conquest though, so I ended up training him in Revelation too, where he became good enough to be brought into the final chapter for me. Niles is definitely one of my favorite Fire Emblem characters gameplay wise, and he isn't far behind the other two remaining characters in this list for me. Gyrus, along with another character, was my favorite character from Fire Emblem Awakening. It was so rewarding to finally get a thief that kicked ass. As a long-time fan of thieves in Fire Emblem, finally having a really good one felt great. I played through Awakening more times than I can remember, and Gyrus has often been in top 3 in the end of the game, the other two being Chrom and the Avatar. He's a nice and laid-back guy. Something I really liked about Gyrus was how he gave nicknames to most of the characters he interacted with. It gave him a friendly and likable feeling. The biggest character quirk when it comes to Gyrus, however, is his immense love for sweets. This guy was all about candy. He even joined the army with candy as his payment. Gyrus is literally risking his life on the battlefield for candy. Something else I appreciated with Gyrus is how he was good at making things like jewelry and baking. Unlike most thieves, Gyrus is strong. He has really good strength and HP, which makes him much more of a combat unit than many of his predecessors. Similar to the other thieves, however, he's still very frail. His defense and resistance is terrible, but he'll dodge most attacks anyway. If he were to get hit though, he'll be in trouble. I've always found Gyrus to be better than Lonku, who is the swordmaster in the game. Not many thieves are better than their swordmaster, and they're definitely usually not in the top 3. So to me, Gyrus was a great unit in Awakening that arrives early and it isn't difficult to train at all. He's definitely worth using. Back when this was a top 5, Gyrus was the winner of my list. He almost became the winner again when I changed it to a top 10. But in the end I decided to put him on a second place. It was really even though. So, if you have been paying attention previously, you could probably figure out the winner of this list. Like I mentioned earlier, I loved the ninja class in Fates, and I used all of the ninja in the first generation. Only one of them, however, is available in all 3 routes, and that someone is Kase. Even before I got to play the game, Kase was one of my favorites, and he was actually the first one ended up S ranking with my avatar in the game. He has been my favorite pretty much since he was announced. That he would be one of the more important characters in the game that wasn't a sibling was a huge plus. So Kase's Saizo's twin brother. He's the calm and polite one of the two. While Saizo is a very cautious and proud person, Kase is prepared to go so far as betraying his home country to follow what he believes in. He's a likable and friendly man. He does however have very low self-esteem because of failures in his past. This leads to him being very loyal to your avatar, to make up for his past mistakes. He'll even go so far as sacrificing his own life unless you A-rank him in Birthright. Seriously people, make Kase your priority in supports before chapter 15 in Birthright. He will actually die otherwise. Kase is the first ninja you'll get in all 3 routes, and the only one you get in Conquest. The ninja class is really useful since their weapons take down your enemies' stats, and Poison Strike will help even further by hurting enemies after an initiated battle. Kase is the weakest one of the 3 ninja you'll get, but he's the fastest one and he's got the best resistance. While Saizo probably is better in Birthright, Kase is more useful by being available early in all 3 routes. Kase definitely made my life easier in Conquest, and he was one of my most used non-sibling units in Revelation. Since his strength is still decent, Kase manages well on his own. He's even better as a support unit, especially since his personal skill even can save you from having to restart entire chapters sometimes, by saving your units. To me, Kase was definitely the best unit of the ones that are available in all paths, excluding your avatar that is. He's a likable person, one of the more story-important characters, and a great and useful unit. Kase was someone that was a favorite of mine before I even got the game he's in, and it remained that way after playing it. He's that kind of character that has got it all for me: personality, story and gameplay. This list has been so difficult for me to rank since I pretty much love everyone from place 6 and up. In my eyes, they're all winners. Kase just had a little extra something. That's all for my top 10 Thieves list. Thank you for watching my video. You probably have a different opinion from mine, so do feel free to leave a comment about it if you want. I love hearing about other people's thoughts, so don't be afraid to share yours. Once again, thanks for watching my video. Feel free to watch some of my other videos if you have nothing better to do.